as the director of NASA, says things are going so swimmingly, the program is so successful, that, as he puts it, we have greater confidence now that we can get to the moon by the end of this decade. He says we are aiming at the last part of 1969.
I think we will have an announcement from Jack King in a few seconds, and I will take these few seconds to say that from this point on, we will have no advance warning of when King will be making an announcement. So he will be interrupting us, and sometimes we may be talking over him, but we'll try to keep it as smooth as possible. This shot, I think, beyond all question, if it comes off successfully, will, for all time, here's Jack King.
This is Gemini Launch Control at the Cape, now T-minus 10 minutes and 15 seconds and counting. Our countdown continues to go excellently at Launch Complex 19, and as it is being checked at the Mission Control Center in Houston. All systems looking good. At the complex at the present time, we are looking forward to a final status check, which comes up about 4 minutes from now. There will be a check to ensure that all the launch site recovery forces are ready. This is coming up just several minutes from now. This would include the 3 helicopters that are flying over the area. One is off the ocean, one in the vicinity of Launch Complex 14, and another a little further north on the Cape in the vicinity of Launch Complex 37. Now, T-minus 9 minutes and 31 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
Scattered out across the Atlantic are at least 8 ships, each with their own aircraft, stationed in predetermined spots to be there should it be necessary to terminate this flight in its early stages and get to the astronauts within a minimum period of time. They, of course,
around the Earth,
tied into this operation
from the ground and from the crew back to the ground
to what's going on now, and waiting for the liftoff. It's not too many minutes away. These things have been calculated so finely and so precisely, and the flight engineers manifest such confidence and competence that they have in the flight plan different methods of bringing the men down at different times to reach different impact points. And if they have a margin of 10 seconds to make a decision, they feel that it's not really a terribly critical time. Here's King again.
This is Gemini Launch Control at the Cape, now 7 seconds away from T-minus 8 minutes and counting. 8 minutes and counting, and the Gemini-5 countdown at the present time. All situations still looking good. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, the command pilot, has been reporting some functions to Rusty Schweikert, who is the capsule communicator in the blockhouse. He reports all systems are go. The launch vehicle is still go at the present time. This is Gemini Launch Control.
Throughout the morning, you've been hearing Jack King with these announcements at Cape Kennedy. It's his responsibility to keep us informed up until time of liftoff and through the early phase of the launch, at which time the responsibility reverts to Paul Haney, who's in Mission Control Center at Houston, Texas, and we'll be hearing from him throughout the remainder of the day. I was about to say a while ago that if the flight engineers feel they have a margin of 10 or 15 seconds to make a decision.
Mark, T-minus 7 minutes and counting. T-minus 7. All conditions still looking good.
Well, to complete this quickly, they feel very comfortable with a 10-second margin to make a crucial decision.
Frank, it looks as if we might, for the first time in the history of the space program, get a departure on time.
We might. It has been remarkably free of difficulty. Now, in about another 3 minutes here, the test conductor, the man who actually runs the launching, is given the final azimuth or direction of the launch, which we know beforehand is going to be 72 degrees off of true north. But the reason they wait so late in the game to give him the figure is to develop skill and competence for programs that are coming up later. GT6, for
This is
example.
Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 6 minutes and counting. T-minus 6, we're about to start our final status check of all aspects of the launch vehicle and the spacecraft at this time. Astronaut Gordon Cooper is still reporting back to the blockhouse. Rusty Schweikert has told him to go get him, Tiger. This is Gemini Launch Control.
I was saying that the next flight will involve two launchings. We will launch an Agena first, and after it makes one orbit and we get the tracking information from it, we'll launch the astronauts to see if they can find it up there and bring the two objects together. And since they will not know precisely what direction the Agena is traveling on, they will not be able to determine the precise direction for the astronauts to fly along. So they're doing that now to develop the skill, even though it's not a part of this particular mission. And he'll be getting that information in about 3 minutes.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 5 minutes and counting, T-minus 5. Our status checks continue. All systems still look go at this time. This is Gemini Launch Control.
Mission Control Center in Houston is surrounded by a series of rooms, and each of these rooms is responsible for a major area of the flight and of the mission and the return and recovery of the astronauts. And each room has a sort of chief who sits in the control center itself and is in contact with his room. And he's prepared at any moment to give
This is Gemini Launch Control, now T-minus 4 minutes and 15 seconds and counting. Astronauts Cooper and Conrad still reporting the status of their spacecraft as go. We continue our checks in the blockhouse. We have now tied in the launch vehicle, the spacecraft, the control center in Houston, and the Air Force Eastern Test Range. All is go at the present time, now coming up on 3 minutes and 50 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
I was saying each of these room chiefs is prepared to give the flight engineers information pertaining to his particular area of responsibility right up to that moment, at any moment.
This is Gemini Launch Control, now T-minus 3 minutes and 22 seconds and counting. We're checking with a computer update. This is the spacecraft computer to ensure that it is synchronized for the launch. T-minus 3 minutes and counting, T-minus 3.
And the blockhouse personnel are now in what is called a negative reporting condition, which is to say, unless someone has something to report, a problem to report, he says nothing. The only people talking are the test conductor, who is talking with the astronauts inside the spacecraft. He's giving them the countdown. And at about T-minus 30 seconds, the
This is Gemini Launch
command
Control,
communicator
now
comes
T-minus 2 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. We have just received a go from the range. The range is cleared to launch. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 2 minutes and counting. We have confirmation that our computer has been updated in the spacecraft. All systems still go on the Gemini-5 countdown.
That clock hasn't stopped clicking since it started way early this morning. We are very close to liftoff now. At about T-minus 1, we'll all shut up.
This is Gemini Launch Control. T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds and counting. T-minus 90 seconds and counting. All systems still looking good. As we approach the final seconds of the countdown, The Titan II launch vehicle will ignite. The two engines in the first stage booster will ignite as we reach 0 in the countdown. 3 seconds later, after numerous parameters have been checked, the launch vehicle will be released. We will have liftoff some 3 seconds after ignition.
1 minute.
Now 1 minute and counting.
The President in the fish room at the White House watching the launching.
T-minus 50 seconds and counting. T-minus 35 seconds. T-minus 25 seconds. We're now primarily on an automatic sequence in the blockhouse, monitoring the final functions as they occur. T-minus 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
Liftoff. We're off on the hour. Clock started and the roll program is initiated. Gordon Cooper reports. Roll program is complete. Pitch program has been initiated. Coming up on 50 seconds. Mark, 50 seconds. Flight. Our velocity at this time is about 1,350 miles an hour. G-force is 2. One minute, 20 seconds. Conrad reports the cabin sealed off a little high. He didn't give us the value. The nominal value is about 5.5 pounds per square inches.
You can see on your screen how rapidly the miles of altitude are clicking off. You hear the sonic booms from the chase planes making film of the missile.
Coming up on 2 minutes. Our velocity, 3,750 miles an hour. G-force is 3.3.
If for any reason they had to end the mission now, they consider it to be a relatively simple matter. But the longer he stays up and the faster he goes, the nearer he is to going into orbit and the more difficult it would be. The President watching closely.
The DCS load, command load coming up from the ground has been received by the spacecraft. We have staging.
The booster engine has cut
plainly
off.
in view on our television monitors and right on the mark. Stage 2 thrust looks good. Looks good on the ground, looks good to the people in the spacecraft.
Everything perfect so far.
Our guidance systems are solid and green all the way. All other values quite nominal.
The distance figures we were showing you were from the launch pad.
Surgeon says everything's go. 3 minutes, 30 seconds. The telemetry data shows the flight is progressing on exactly the planned rate.
In a few moments, the astronauts and ground control will exchange go, no-go opinions.
4 minutes into the flight, 4 minutes, our velocity 9,600 miles an hour. G-forces after staging drop back to 2.2. Flight directors polled all the flight controllers here in the control center. They all give us a go for sustainer engine cutoff. Four minutes, 30 seconds. 4 minutes, 30 seconds into the flight.
Tiny, tiny dot that perhaps you can still make out.
Coming up on 5 minutes.
And
Our velocity, 13,675 miles per hour. G-forces, 3.8.
now what you are seeing here
We've achieved
is a
0.8 or
film made of the
80%
mission
required
control
velocity
room
to put
during
Gemini-5
a
in
rehearsal
orbit.
for this flight. This is not the actual scene as it is now. And that arc that you see on your screen is the path that the men are traveling.
Second
They are
stage
100
cutoff
miles
should
up
occur in
and
less than 10
460
seconds.
miles downrange. They have now reached more than 80% of their velocity. Now you see the
Standing
distance
by
miles
for-
increase much more rapidly than the altitude miles now.
A cutoff indication. We are go. We had a second stage shutdown. We've been given a go for the flight.
And what you see here is the edge of the Earth in our space
We have not heard
center
from the Gemini-5 spacecraft. We
with
are
the
reading thrusting on the ground, which would indicate they are leaving the
spacecraft
booster.
in space. Heading out over the Atlantic, around Bermuda. We should get a report soon that they have separated from the second stage. When they do, they give a slight forward thrust.
Gordon Cooper's just checked in. He says everything's going fine. 7 minutes into the flight.
And after that short thrust, they don't control the attitude of the
He's
spacecraft.
calling out his values from the thrusting, the moving away from the booster. His transmission was a little broken. We have an orbit of 85 nautical miles. That would translate to about 99 statute miles by 199 nautical miles, which would translate into statute miles at 230 miles. It's an orbit of approximately 99 miles by 230 miles.
Now, this is a higher orbit than the United States has had in the past. There are reasons for this, which we'll get into later. According to the flight plan, they're already checking out some of the systems aboard this spacecraft, the control systems.
Pete Conrad now in conversation with Jim McDivitt, advising he's on UHF channel number 2. The pilots and the ground have just agreed on what channel they will use for a comm check over the Canary Islands in about 20 minutes. We did experience some garbled transmission there. We had no transmissions about the point of second stage cutoff. However, they did clear up at about 6 minutes, and we're reading them quite clear now. They're in contact with the Bermuda station.
One of the most harrowing and, let's face it, one of the most dangerous phases of the entire operation has now been completed, the launch phase, and they are in orbit. And they plan to stay there for 8 days and make 121 revolutions around the Earth, come down just as they begin the 122nd one. They are 99 miles above the Earth at their lowest point and 230 miles above the Earth at their highest point, traveling at 17,500 miles an hour plus. They translate those figures into feet per second and come sometimes within a very few feet per second of getting their anticipated speed. It is possible, if need be, at insertion, for the spacecraft to give itself an extra little push that will do the job. After insertion, the command pilot and the pilot, both the flyers, have a long list of things that they begin to do, mostly stowing equipment, getting things out of the way, things that were necessary for the launch that are no longer necessary. So, David, we did get it off on time.
First time, Frank, and it seems from here to have been absolutely perfect.
It was beautiful.
That ring of lights indicates the recovery area through which the spacecraft is passing. This one centered in Bermuda. The map you're seeing in NBC's Space Center will pass into darkness, light and darkness, at the appropriate times, as the Earth does.
Gemini Control, Houston, we have had loss of signal from the Bermuda station at 11 minutes into the flight.
Most of the excitement in the orbital phase of this flight will come during the first 5 hours. That's when they will attempt this chase across
Flight
the
Director
skies.
Chris Kraft is talking to the Canary station at this time, pointing out certain things that he wants checked in the standard checklist during the Canary pass. The spacecraft at the midpoint over the Atlantic Ocean.
And there are at least two good reasons for cramming these activities into the early part of the flight. One, the crew is fresh, but two, it is at this time that they have their maximum coverage from the ground tracking stations. And these tracking stations give information that is vital to the project at hand, which is to try to find another object and join up with it, or at least get within virtually nudging distance of it. But at the moment, they're running down their insertion checklist, it's called. And checking their communications. High frequency, ultra high frequency.
And they have reached halfway to Africa in 12 minutes and 40 seconds.
We understand that we have a tape recording of the astronauts talking to Mission Control, or the blockhouse, during the time of liftoff. And this recording is about to be played back for us, I believe. Paul Haney will have some word for us on that in just a few moments from Mission Control in Houston. And we'll hear what they sounded like. To me, they always sound unbelievably calm. Paul Haney is coming up about now to, I think, play the tape for us.
Gemini Control, Houston here. 13 minutes, 44 seconds into the flight. It's been determined that we will make a slight burn at first apogee over Australia. Burn to raise the apogee of the flight, which is presently at 230 miles. This is approximately 20 miles below the precisely desired value. We have the launch phase tape, the voice tape, racked up, and we are prepared to play that tape for you now.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Liftoff. Started. On our way. Start program initiate. Roger, on the roll. 6 seconds. Started. Roll program initiate. Roll program center. Roger. Pitch initiate. Roger on the pitch. You're looking good. Roger. Feels mighty good. Been a long time getting back. Roger. Roger, it'll be 50 seconds on my mark. 2, 1, mark. Roger.
The cabin sealed off a little high.
Roger. The Gemini-5 launch pad. 140 now. Say again, Gemini-5? You lost the hip fuel gauge. You still have a half. Roger, you lost the hip. Roger. That's on stage 2. Roger, you lost hips on stage 2. Roger. That was the hips on stage 2. All Roger. 75 is going for staging. Roger.
Two plus 25 DCS is in.
Roger. Roger, we stage. Roger on the stage. Roger. Roger, got it. Roger, we have guidance initiate. Stage 2 thrust is looking good, Gemini-5. Roger. Gemini-5, Houston here. Looks like both of your guidance systems are working fine. Roger.
Soft color, they look
Bearings are testing. Roger on the bearings.
What a beautiful view.
Roger. Everything's looking fine down here now, Gemini-5.
Roger, it's fine to get up here. Speaker, be up tunnel.
Gemini-5, your go down here.
Roger, Gemini-5 is go here.
Stand by for point 8. Point 8, Gemini-5, point 8. Gemini-5, this is Houston, you're at point 8. Gemini-5, Houston here, you pass through point 8. Gemini-5, this is Houston here, how do you read? We have a steady here. Gemini-5, your go, your go.
What we have, excuse me, what we've been hearing here is a playback of the communications between the astronauts and ground control during the launch phase of the mission. And what we tried to do was to match it with the pictures of the liftoff, and it seemed to me that it came off rather well. We missed it by about 3 seconds. But that was an instant replay of the liftoff and an instant replay of the voices of the astronauts. And we heard Cooper say shortly after liftoff that it'd be a long time getting back. And about the only thing that I heard Conrad say was, what a beautiful view. And you may have noticed that McDivitt, the capsule communicator, was telling them that they had point 8, and then that you're past 8. That was to notify them that they had 8/10 of the velocity required for insertion into orbit, and then a few seconds later told them, you are go. And they have gone. They are, in fact, over Africa, in contact with the ground tracking station at the Canary Islands. At this particular time in the flight, 21 minutes and 35 seconds of elapsed time, they are checking out those thrusters, the same ones that they gave a static firing while they were still on top of the Titan booster at Cape Kennedy not too long ago. They're checking them out in the air now and undergoing a communications systems check. They are in an elliptical orbit, which means that it is not completely circular, and because it isn't, it has a high point and a low point, an apogee, the high point, and a perigee, the low point, and we'll get into some of that a little bit later. Right. Are we supposed to do something else right now? David?
Well, I'm supposed to do something, Frank. We made the coast of Africa in 18 minutes, and we'll be back. Here again is a message from Gulf.
It happens twice daily near Liverpool. 20 tank wagons, taken up from Gulf's ocean terminal at Ellesmere Port, are coupled to a British railway diesel. 20 tank wagons that form a train known as the Orange Ball Express. Coming on the main line at Houghton, the Orange Ball makes its way southward, running down the Wirral, past Chester, Crewe, Brassett Hall, Stoke-on-Trent, southward, toward the Gulf Inland Depot at West Bromwich, with petrol, diesel fuel, paraffin and fuel oil, all destined for use by makers of auto parts and fine china, of steel and children's shoes, by silversmiths, power stations, carpet makers, by virtually every type of manufacturer in the English Midlands. each weekday, the Orange Ball Express moves its loaded chain of wagons to West Bromwich. In consequence, one can form the impression of a mobile pipeline transporting over 1,000 tons of oil energy every 24 hours into the heart of industrial England. Gulf, for whatever work there is to be done.
Now let's switch back to Houston for an announcement from Paul Haney. Understand we've had somewhat of a premature cue. Paul Haney will be up in about 15 seconds. That's a picture of the partially completed manned spacecraft center in Houston. Here is Haney.
This is Gemini Control at Houston. We're 24 minutes into the flight with the spacecraft over the Kano area. We've not yet established contact with the Kano station. However, we had good contact very few minutes ago with the Canary station. During the Canary Pass, the complete ring out of the communications circuits was completed between HF and several circuits available on UHF. If anything, the HF circuit sounded a little clearer during that pass. During the powered phase of flight, you heard Gordon Cooper refer to the loss of an IPS system, an IPS. This is a reference to an instrumentation, the instrumentation power supply on the second stage. It apparently was a faulty reading on board the spacecraft because our instrumentation power supply gauges on the ground downrange were reading all the way. However, if that system had been lost, we want to emphasize there is a backup system which runs concurrently with it. It's called APS, or Auxiliary Power Supply, and we believe here on the ground that both systems were operative. Simply was a bad reading on the gauge. This is Gemini Control Houston at 26 minutes into the flight.
The spacecraft carrying Cooper and Conrad is now, as you can see, over the heart of Africa, in contact with the Kato ground station. The next one, I believe, is on the island of Madagascar, just as they go out over the Indian Ocean toward Australia. Now, we're about to switch back to Houston again for a taped account of the moments of the launch, as reported and recorded in Houston by Aline Saarinen. We'll stand by.
It was the most beautiful liftoff I've ever seen. And it seemed to go off faster. Usually they seem to just slowly lift off, and this time it seemed to just blast off. And I'm as happy as I can be about it.
Are you going to go to mission control?
I'll probably go to mission control tomorrow.
Ms. Conrad, I heard somebody remark that this was the most flawless launch they'd seen for quite a while.
I didn't hear a single glitch.
Do you want to describe what the children's reaction was?
Well, fortunately, they were nice and quiet until after liftoff, and just about time of insertion, Christopher started turning somersaults on the bed and using it as a trampoline.
Thank you very much.
Did you hoop and holler when you saw it?
That was Jane Conrad, the wife of astronaut Pete Conrad. She watched the liftoff in the family room with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wynn DuBose of Uvalde, Texas, her younger sister Marcy Gond and husband from the University of Texas, and the four boys, 4, 6, 8, and 10, who usually are about as still as Mexican jumping beans, but as she said, this time controlled themselves. Her plans are to go to mission control tomorrow, not today. She's gone back in now to watch the rendezvous maneuver. Aline Saarinen at the Conrad House, Timber Cove, Texas.
So we are 29 minutes now into the longest voyage in human history. 8 days, 121 times, 121 revolutions of the Earth. It'll take 191 hours, and in that time, Cooper and Conrad will travel more than 3 million miles. The longest voyage in human history. The longest previous space flight was Russia's, 5 days, 81 orbits. This, again, will be the longest. It, as you saw if you were with us, began flawlessly and precisely on time. As you see now on our map, it is over the spacecraft is over Africa, heading slightly southward, nearing the equator. Everything so far has been reported to be perfect. It's in orbit, very close to the precise orbit plan, but it was announced a few minutes ago that over Australia they will burn or fire the spacecraft's own rockets briefly to adjust the orbit very slightly. It is now 99 miles at its lowest point, 230 miles from the Earth at its highest point. And the speed, of course, is 17,500 miles an hour.
I believe they said an adjustment of 20 miles they plan to make over Australia. Now we're going to St. Louis and Bill Stout.
One of the features of this spacecraft that's especially appealing to the astronauts and to men like Bob Sharp, himself an engineer and a pilot, is that the Gemini spacecraft is built around the men, built for flying, and that's just what they're going to do now in changing their orbit. Bob, how do they do it?
In this case, they'll use this switch here to power up the maneuver thrusters, and this switch here to activate their maneuver handle. Now, this handle is essentially a throttle which you can accelerate forward, backward, to either side, or up and down. And by thrusting forward, you'll increase your speed, which is what they'll do in this case, where they're changing their orbit about 20 miles. It'll take a little bit less than 40 feet per second. So he'll establish his attitude in a level flight relative to the horizon and apply thrust with the handle. While he's doing that,
and right in here, he sees the result of what he's doing.
That's right. This is essentially a space-age speedometer, which will show the change in velocity that he's applying. So for this orbital change, you'll apply roughly about 35 foot per second during this maneuver. You can almost use a rule of thumb that say 2 foot per second for each nautical mile of altitude that you want to increase your orbit.
And in this spacecraft, it's no great trick.
No, it's designed for the astronaut to operate, and the flexibility of changing the orbit here was the original concept of the spacecraft, which we need to do. We've done on previous missions, and we'll need to do it for the rendezvous missions.
Actually flying the spacecraft to push it farther out into space. Bill Stout, McDonnell Aircraft, St. Louis.
This is Gemini Control at Houston, 33 minutes into the flight. After reducing the data from Bermuda and several other stations downrange, we're able to quote new perigee and apogee elements for you. We have a perigee of 100 even, 100 statute miles. We have an apogee of 216 statute miles. That is slightly lower than our first indication. 216 on the apogee. We will have an apogee burn at 56 minutes into the flight. We are estimating now the burn will be at the rate of 10 feet per second for a duration of 13 seconds. This will have the effect of raising our perigee about 5 or 6 miles. In the powered phase of flight, Dr. Berry, our flight surgeon, has noted some rather low heart rates, he was somewhat surprised. He has quoted to me a heart rate on the pilot, Pete Conrad, of only a peak rate of 145 beats per minute, and on the command pilot, Gordon Cooper, 135. That's 145 on the heart peak for Pete Conrad and 135 for Gordon Cooper. The spacecraft now on the coast of Southeast Africa, approaching the Tananarive station. This is Gemini Control Houston at 34 minutes after the hour.
This map you've been seeing just until this second, perhaps I should explain, is a huge globe, relief globe, about, 6 feet? 8 feet, 6 or 8 feet in diameter here in our Space Center. That's it, with a miniature spacecraft flying around it at the appropriate speed, the Earth rotating at the appropriate speed, the universe visible behind it, the light and dark areas of the Earth maintained as they are in fact, and during there you see the right half of the globe in darkness, and the spacecraft heading toward one of the sunsets it encounters every 90 minutes. And we will be seeing this from time to time during the flight. Don Goddard is in Haverford, Pennsylvania, which is the home of the Conrads. So we're going to switch there.
.104 Sunset Lane, Haverford, Pennsylvania, and the home of Pete Conrad's mother and stepfather, Mr. and Mrs. J. Weir Sargent. Parents, I think we're to congratulate you. You are now officially, or unofficially, members of that small but very growing society called the Parents of Working Astronauts. Mrs. Sargent, this is a little different than yesterday. What was the routine this morning?
Very exciting and a perfectly beautiful view on the televisions, and I'm so glad they're off, and I'm sure everything will be fine.
What was the high point of the program so far?
The blast-off, or I should say lift-off.
The lift-off. And did Pete look natural to you? You had several good views of him.
Yes, just the same. They say he's gained 20 pounds, but I can't see it.
He looked pretty calm, did he, to his mother?
Very.
And how did his mother feel?
Fine. I'm sure it would go off all right.
You were?
Yes.
You've had this confidence and faith right along, haven't you?
Yes. I think they'll do a wonderful job, Cooper and Conrad.
Now, what is going to be your routine during these long days ahead?
I think just looking at the television.
That's going to be quite an ordeal by itself, really.
Well, I think they'll give you a time schedule on it during the 8 days.
I hope so. What do you think Pete is thinking right now?
I wouldn't know. I've never been in a capsule.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sargent. Thank you, Mr. Sargent. This is Don Goddard, Haverford, Pennsylvania.
We've had an initial report on the reading of the pulse rates of the two space flyers, and from all appearances and from that reading, Pilot Cooper is living up to his reputation as being completely and absolutely unflappable with a pulse rate of only 135. We'll return after this word from Go.
I'm Barbara Farrell, one of Gulf's tour guide girls. Our job? Keeping a friendly eye on Gulf service stations. See that they're neat and tidy, the way you'd expect them to be. We look into places you never see. And look over and around places you see all the time. If we find anything wrong, we make a note of it, so you won't have to. We check 49 different places and things in every station. Inside, outside, everywhere. Just to make traveling more enjoyable for you, where your driving takes a turn for the best.
38 minutes into the flight. Astronaut Cooper, as Chet said, almost totally relaxed. A pulse rate of 135 and sitting still in an armchair. It's only about 80. Frank McGee?
They're very calm about the whole thing. Cooper sounded terribly calm in the one voice transmission that we've heard so far. When they first lifted off, they thought they were a little bit lower at their low point than they wanted to be and a little bit higher at their high point. But as they continued on across Africa and got additional readings from the tracking stations, they discovered that this, in fact, was not the case and that they came remarkably close to hitting the exact orbit that they wanted, which is 100 miles above the Earth at the low point and 216 miles above the Earth at the high point. Nevertheless, they will adjust this because the flight plan called for them to do it. Now, in this strange space business, in order to raise the perigee, or the low point, you release energy when you're at the highest point of your orbit. In other words, you make what they call an apogee kick to raise your orbit at the low point. And their high point, or apogee, comes while they're over Australia. So they will raise it by thrusting forward at the rate of 10 feet per second. This will have the effect, 180 degrees away, of raising their perigee, or low point, by a distance of about 5 miles, which will make that 105 miles. And the reason for this is that they have some maneuvering to do. And in the course of the maneuvers, they will lower it again. And they don't want to start from too low a point and lower it still more for danger of getting too close to the Earth's atmosphere and endangering the endurance of the mission. So this was all programmed and all planned, and they came remarkably close to what they wanted. They're at 100 and 216, whereas what they had in mind was 100 and 219. So they're only 3 miles off. And we'll have that maneuver coming up in about 10 minutes over Australia. It's the first one that they have scheduled, and it's a part, actually, the very beginnings of their...